Thank you all very much for joining us today. This is the Coastal Cities Group Annual Conference Meeting. Today is October 8th, 2020. We very much appreciate you joining us here today in this virtual environment. We, of course, wish we could all be together in Long Beach, but obviously that can't happen, so we're making the best with our situation. My name is Derek Dolphy. I am the League's Legislative Representative for Environmental Quality and Community Services, and I am the lead staff for the Coastal Cities Group. And along with me is Caroline Cerencioni, who is our legislative policy analyst who helps me out with this group. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So next slide, please. So just a few housekeeping slides before I turn it over to our chair of this group. First of all, as you guys have probably already noticed, all attendees have been muted upon entry, and actually you will need to wait a moment. If you have a question or comment, League staff will need to unmute you. That's just to make sure that we reduce background noise and make sure that the meeting is as productive as possible. So if you're trying to speak, you might have to wait a moment for League staff to unmute you. As we said, if you have a comment or a question, since you are muted, we do encourage you to put that in the chat box below. We will have several points throughout the presentation today where we will be taking questions. So if you have a question, please make sure that you write that down in the comment box, and we'd love it if you'd include your name and your city, so that way if there's any follow-up, we can make sure to do that. And of course, just a disclaimer, this webinar is being recorded. We will post it on our League website afterwards for anyone who was not able to attend the meeting today. So please don't say anything that you don't want other people to hear you say in the future. Next slide, please. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to our illustrious chair, Mayor Ed Waage of Pismo Beach. Take it away.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Our first ever virtual meeting of the Coastal Cities Group. I want to first of all go over the agenda. I'll speak about retrospective what we've done this year. We'll spend some time, especially about a draft sea level rise working group joint statement. We do have two guest speakers from the Coastal Commission, Eric Howell and Katie Rice. We'll have a very short presentation on ADU policies, our work plan next year, and questions and answer. Next slide. Again, what we set out to do this year was several things, but because of COVID, we didn't get all of it done, but we did make significant progress on sea level rise. We did conduct a webinar in August, but the main thing we also conducted a survey of coastal cities about sea level rise, but we also have been spending most of our time working with a couple of coastal commissioners and some of our leadership in the Coastal Cities Group to talk about sea level rise, and it's been very productive. The next slide. I do want to thank our leadership committee this year. It's Heidi Messner, Eureka Far North, Harvey Rarback at Half Moon Bay, myself here in Pismo Beach, Eric Friedman, Santa Barbara, Jill Hardy, Huntington Beach, she's our vice chair, and Ed Spriggs in Imperial Beach. Next slide. Again, one of the key things we spent time on since the joint workshop we had with the Coastal Commission last year is to work on sea level rise. We all agreed at that meeting with the Coastal Commission that we would form a subcommittee to look at sea level rise issues, since that was the most difficult issue we decided we needed to tackle. And we've been meeting about monthly since over a year now with a couple of coast commissioners and trying to decide what we can achieve on these joint meetings. Next slide. Again, the workshop that we had, we agreed to move forward with this group, but it does include representatives from the counties, the CSAC, two coastal commissioners, Executive Director Jack Ainsworth, and various staff. Besides myself, we have Ed Spriggs from Imperial Beach and Jill Hardy, our vice chair. From the counties, we had Bruce Gibson leading the effort, and John Leopold, Santa Cruz, and Linda Hopkins, Sonoma. Two commissioners, Kel Groom from San Mateo County and Mike Wilson, Humboldt County. And it's great we have a couple of local government officials as part of this effort. what we worked on, and was a lot of back and forth, was to come up with a joint statement to guide future sea level rise planning and implementation. And throughout all of this, of course, we've been trying to emphasize local control. And I think you'll see some of those elements as we move forward. Next slide. One of the key things that really helped us, and I can't say enough about it, was that we had we made presentations to this working group, and the presentations were the same ones we conducted in our webinar in August. So if you saw that, you saw what we looked at from Imperial Beach, Ed Spriggs and staff, Eureka, Heidi Messner, and Santa Barbara, Eric Friedman. And when we made those presentations to this working group, I think especially this Coastal Commission staff and the two commissioners were very impressed at the kind of struggles cities have to go through in order to update our local coastal plans. And I think that was almost pivotal in trying to point out to this working group that cities are trying to address sea level rise, but the process in updating our LCPs is very onerous. It's time consuming, expensive. And I think that did make it, I think we made our point that we're trying hard to do a good job, but we need more help from especially the Coastal Commission on getting there. Next slide. There's three parts to this joint statement. Again, this is what the product we have at this point. We do have a joint meeting with the Coastal Commission in December where we will discuss this further. The joint statement has three parts: state and local challenges, the shared principles to guide adaptation planning, and I think one of the key parts is the creative solutions and actions, and we'll go through those. Next slide. We start out with the guiding principles, opportunities, and challenges to adapt to sea level rise. And the first part just basically states the problem, which is we've got more extreme storm and weather events. We've got a varied coast along the 1,200-mile California coast. Sea level rise impact vary greatly, and we made that point during the presentations. There's significant impact on coastal economies. Coastal resources and development is going to be at risk. And also there's a disproportionate impact on those who cannot afford to live next to the coast to get access to and recreate along the coast. So I think that's going to be a key part when we move forward to try to address. We've got various sea level rise adaptation solutions that are going to be very resource intensive. As we all know, when sea level rise, you have infrastructure you have to deal with, all kinds of planning uses. So it's going to have a huge impact, of course, and there's various trade-offs whenever we do anything. And I think a good part of it is to look at how the strategies we adopt now might affect future options as we move forward. And especially what I think what we came to a conclusion is that we can't just look at our own cities. We have to look at our neighboring areas too, the county or other cities. And they want to look at that. It's important to look at that whole impact in that area, not just your own city. Next slide. And now I'll hand it off to Ed Spriggs.
Thank you very much, Mayor Waage. I hope everyone can hear me okay. One of the interesting things about the process arriving at this document is it's a very short and succinct document, just 3 pages. We're going to go over much of it in the next several slides. And one of the nice things about this is that we're addressing 2 of the points that we addressed at our workshop last July. Both sea level rise, and incorporating in that is the LCP process. You just about can't deal with one without the other. And so we're getting at process issues as well as substantive issues in this exercise. So let's just take a look at this slide. I'm not going to go through every bullet point. The key point here, I think, is is to work for creative planning solutions that provide for local flexibility. Now, at the LCP and community level and statewide consistency at the policy level. The original formulation here was very important because it set up a contradiction between the Coastal Commission's desire for consistency in everything that it does, every LCP following the same process and guidelines and format and content. And just like they do when they rule on individual applications, they're, they see themselves as a judicial body and they want to be consistent, and they put consistency above everything else, which leads to a one-size-fits-all policy towards the cities with regard to LCPs. We have managed to get away from that so far by talking about local flexibility at the community level being a very important value, and statewide consistency at the policy level. And when it comes to sea level rise, there is no legislative frame for it. The Coastal Act doesn't deal with sea level rise. So we think we can try to keep the Coastal Commission, and they will hopefully agree to looking at LCPs from a very broad policy standpoint when it comes to addressing sea level rise issues, as opposed to making everyone similar. An important point here is, remember, we talked about managed retreat. That's a exact issue of the kind that we're talking about here. It doesn't apply everywhere. So that's where the question of statewide consistency really is the rubber that meets the road. We want to get rid of that sort of application of the same policies to every LCP. So this principle, I think, helps us do that. Moving quickly to the last one on this page, which is another important one, develop phased approaches to adaptation based on thresholds. This makes the process of adapting to sea level rise based on objective, factual, measurable standards, as opposed to opinions, politics, ideology. And we think this is very important. We think there's a consensus between ourselves and the Commission that we should be looking at going from one adaptation strategy to another based on actual evidence on the ground that it's time to make a change. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, go back to the last one. Okay, next one, sorry. This one has some important concepts in it as well. Disclosure being the top one, the one at the top. Create new tools is the second bullet there to support adaptation. Now, this includes and refers to mitigation to offset impacts to public beaches. One of our big issues is how do we use hard protection, and the sort of almost absolute prohibition against hard protection. One way out is to say, okay, if we do hard protection that has an impact on beach width, then maybe we can mitigate elsewhere. This is going to require city-county cooperation. But thinking about the property and the property values that are preserved and enhanced by protection, this is a benefit to both cities and counties, and should drive a cooperative effort between cities and counties if there's a need to mitigate actions to protect property in the cities. The next to last one is progress over perfection. This is a very important point. When we deal with staff, every single city has a problem dealing with their LCP and Coastal Commission staff of everything having to be perfect, back and forth, ad infinitum. We want to establish a principle, and we think we've made a lot of progress that it's better to focus on progress and incremental steps rather than trying to have an LCP that's perfect for all time. And getting that across to the 12 commissioners at our workshop, I think, is going to be a very important achievement if we can do it. Next slide.
That would be me. So one of the things in working on LCP updates is that the Coastal Commission looks 20 years out, where a city and a council specifically is looking more short term, next election in 2 years, 4 years. They also are dealing with a constituency that often looks at the short term, not so much 2 decades out. And so that was one of the areas where we wanted to try and kind of bring that timeline a little bit closer together. Next slide, please. So the opportunity is to have the commission and the local governments work on a clear and established time frame for the LCP, so that there can be different, so that we can bring that vision closer together, like 10 to 20 years. And that really is important for sea level rise, because we're not going to see major change in the next 2 years in most areas, but we need to plan for the next couple of decades, but also have regular updates that check to see what really is happening as time goes on, because what is predicted and what happens might be 2 different events. And so the ability to update a portion of the LCP without opening the whole thing up, and especially on these long-term goals like sea level rise, is important. And so the action would be to co-develop guidance on an improved process that would result in not having unreasonably long an LCP process. Let me make sure I get all of that. So yeah, so we're working on that. Next slide.
Go ahead, Ed. And you're muted.
This is the area of creative solutions and actions. And again, the idea of maintaining some degree of statewide consistency and allowing local flexibility and being willing to experiment with different LCP approaches for different conditions at different localities is a core thing to try to get across that we've been working on. We know that they're always going to pull back to one inconsistency, and we will be trying to address that through the lens that sea level rise is a whole different area, and experimentation is valuable. As Heidi mentioned, focusing on more short-term solutions and making the LCP a shorter-term document because of rapidly changing conditions, new science, and also the fact that it lowers the need for perfection. You're going to try to include in an LCP things that reach out 30, 40, 50 years. Obviously, trying to include that in a document when there are rapidly changing circumstances is going to require that you plan for the very worst case scenario over that long time period. And this is something that creates a big, a big gap between cities and the Coastal Commission. I lost my connection.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So creative solutions, when we go to the next slide, we are going to be trying to draw from best practices regarding recently certified LCPs, and that will hopefully create a baseline of the kinds of flexibility and the kinds of different solutions that that can be built upon. So that's basically the end of my section, and Ed, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. Next slide. Well, one of the key issues is to look at the impacts now and in the future, and trying to look at ways to mitigate any impacts that we have if we, especially armoring. I think this one is going to be one of the most contentious issues, but we are certainly looking at some way to incorporate armoring. And of course, the Coastal Commission wants to make sure that we mitigate it in some way. And I think that's kind of where they're at right now. But We certainly are trying to keep open that option, especially for critical infrastructure. And there's a lot of, I think the coastal commissioners and the staff understand that we need some armoring. And the question is, how long can it be there? And when would you ultimately have to remove it if you can't deal with it? I think we also are looking at the economic impacts and also, of course, any other coastal resources. But one of the key things too is to look at how we can mitigate those impacts by working with some other jurisdictions as well. Next slide. So the bottom line is what we are looking forward as we move forward on this is to see how we can work together to find the creative solutions. And I think the presentations the cities made to the Coastal Commission showed that we are trying to come up with creative solutions, that we can allow some coastal armoring at the same time trying to mitigate the impacts. I mentioned already, but regional mitigation is something that they were really interested in. So if you have something that you need to mitigate, look at other ways across that jurisdiction to mitigate. Next slide. At this point, this is an introduction pretty much to where we're at. As I mentioned, we're going to have a joint meeting with the Coastal Commission in December. And we also do want to get any feedback beyond this meeting here. We'll open it up to questions now. But this is a framework. This is not guidance at this point or policies. This is a framework for moving forward on trying to address these thorny issues. So at this point, we'll open it to questions. And do we have questions?
All right, thank you, Chair. I've just reminded everyone, if you'd like to ask a question, please put it in the chat box at this time. And we'll be monitoring that and we'll let you know. As of right now, we don't have any questions or comments in the chat box.
Okay, I don't see any questions. I would go to my colleagues then. Ed Spriggs and Jill, do you have any further comments on it?
Yeah,
Just
this
that
is
this-
Ed.
Oh, go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Ed.
Oh, okay. I think that we are all pretty much on the same page as cities, and it would be good to get everyone's input. Even if you don't have any thoughts right now, email any thoughts you might have to Ed Waage and to Derek Dolphy, because we need to have a sense that we can go forward back to the commission with a sense that this document has a consensus of the cities. We worked very hard with the counties and with the commission staff and the two commissioners to get to this point. And now the next step is going to be for it to be reviewed by the commission at the formal in their November meeting, and then again at our workshop. One of the things that is very important that's embedded in here is a more flexible and shorter term approach to LCPs, and for it to be fact-based, threshold-based, as we mentioned. One of the benefits of that is that it buys us time, not only to look at changing conditions, but also for state and local resources based on a better understanding that sea level rise is really threatening the entire coastline of the United States, and that major resources need to be invested in adaptation. That doesn't exist right now. So when we have the need for major relocation of public infrastructure, for example, there's no resources for that. And the same thing when it comes to the need for any other sorts of major adaptation strategies. So I hope we're going to be able to convince the commission to take a lighter touch, allowing more local flexibility, and recognizing that some of the draconian measures that they have pressed for in the past, are not really possible at the local level politically, nor are there funds available at the state or federal level to implement them in any event. And our approach, I think, will achieve that. if we get it accepted by the Coastal Commission.
And we do have some questions at this point.
Yeah.
I would like to turn to the questions if I could. We have a,
Yeah, I was going to insert one thing. I just want to emphasize that this is, we want to send this document out to all the cities. We're working through the league to accomplish that, and that this will continue to be a document that gets worked on with the cities, the counties, and the Coastal Commission. There is one question here that kind of goes along with that. Can cities attend the joint meeting in December?
the short answer is yes. It's going to be it's a special meeting of the Coastal Commission. I believe it's December 17th. We'll get that information out to everybody. The leadership team will be on the panel. Along with the county representatives, and of course the Coastal Commissioners. But anyone else can certainly join, since it's going to be a public meeting. And another one is, how can we encourage Coastal Commission to allow incremental improvements to LCP documents instead of multi-year, multi-million-dollar updates? And I think that's one of the things we were trying to get to. I think Ed Spriggs, you were pointing that out too, is that let's not try to be perfect the first go around, but let's make some progress. And I think the Coastal Commission staff certainly understood that, to try to make some improvements now and not try to get everything done all at once. So some progress is better than no progress. Another question from Jamie Timberlake, City of Encinitas. What are you considering as mitigation for armoring? And that's wide open. I think that whole issue of mitigation is going to be dependent upon the particular project that you're trying to armor. So I'm not sure, except that
Ed, I'd like to just give
ahead.
a couple examples there where mitigation, where city-county cooperation might be needed. Let's say that a city wants to enhance seawalls and revetments, which could very well have an effect of narrowing or eliminating some beaches. The Coastal Commission is very concerned about access to the beach. It may be possible right next door or very nearby, in cooperation with the county, to create an access road or a parking lot or some sort of improvement that allows beach access where it wasn't really feasible before, to replace the loss of access that the city project is accomplishing. So that's just one example of what might happen.
I'm going to skip down to one of the bottom questions where it says, please address the issue of...
And we're having trouble hearing you, Jill.
Oh.
Go ahead, we can hear you again.
Okay. It says, please address the issue of unfunded public infrastructure projects that the Coastal Commission mandates. In Pacifica, we may be required to move a sewer line at a cost of approximately $2 million. And I know that's a concern throughout the state, is infrastructure that is close to the beach, including infrastructure that's being proposed to be close to the beach, while they're encouraging other cities to have managed retreat with such infrastructure. Do you guys want to discuss how we talked about those obstacles?
Well, I think I'm just looking at the clock here, and we do need to move along. But what I would recommend at this time is, on the chat room or the chat section, there are the email addresses for both Derek Dolphy and Carolyn Cericione. So we would ask you to send email further questions and comments on the presentation, and we will be bringing that to the next joint meeting we have with the working group. At this point, I would like to go on the next slide and move on to the next presentation. We do have at least one Coastal Commissioner. Do we have both or just one, Derek?
I believe Commissioner Howell is the commissioner that's on at this time.
Okay, Eric, can you unmute yourself?
I am unmuted, Mayor. So again, thank you for inviting me to join you today. Unfortunately, your annual meetings consistently take place at the same time that we have our October Coastal Commission meeting. So you know what? Sometimes there is some upside to these Zoom meetings in that I can Zoom over here. We were discussing Oceano Dunes, so you know it's a mixed bag. My colleague is going to attempt to get over here, but if they're in the middle of deliberations, she may not be able to make it in time. So again, I want to, I know I speak for the whole commission when I tell you how much I appreciate the League of Cities and especially the Coastal Cities Group's willingness to partner with the Coastal Commission in looking at ways that we can try to tackle sea level rise and some of these more complicated issues associated with climate change and really every disaster that seems to be hitting us. So sorry, the chat just throws me off. So yesterday, I don't know if anyone was watching, but Executive Director Jack Ainsworth presented the joint principles for sea level rise, and for review by the whole commission. And not so much deliberations, but we're going to talk about it again next month. But Mark Gold, Commissioner Mark Gold, who is the Secretary of Natural Resources, representative to the Coastal Commission, specifically asked at the next Coastal Commission meeting if there could be an evaluation of some of these proposals side by side with the other state guidelines regarding sea level rise. So these proposals here that, I just came into the tail end of it, but there's some discussion about potentially mitigating somewhere else for the armoring and protection of the coast in one area. So I think that's going to be a very interesting evaluation. So I would encourage everyone to, check out the Coastal Commission agenda next month. And my guess is that it's going to be in the executive director's remarks and report, which should be the beginning on that Wednesday. But I think that's going to be very interesting because, as we all know, there's some places in the state that we are going to have to armor. I don't think that anybody is in the dark about we are going to have to armor our ports. We're going to have to protect public infrastructure. We had a proposal that was in front of the commission yesterday, which I think it was in San Clemente, and it was a landslide that was threatening the railroad, and it was also threatening the sewer line for the city of San Clemente. And so it was a bluff protection project, which oddly enough required the removal of a duplex and the rebuilding of a duplex roughly twice the size. And I think it's going to turn into a public-private partnership. But at the end of the day, the commission approved it. And, sometimes we do it while holding our noses. But I think we've tried to be supportive of protecting public infrastructure. You know what? I know you don't have all that much time. Mayor Waage, are there any questions for me right now?
Let's see, could we have questions for for our coastal commissioner? Well, there's one question here maybe you can address is how are there's one of the issues we're looking at, of course, is the social justice issues, if you will, especially with respect to access to the beach. Do you have any thoughts on how that might happen? How we can consider the issue of making sure we provide access to some of those who might otherwise have difficulty getting to the beach with some of our efforts here?
Well, thank you, Mayor Waage. I think that is a good question, and it seems to be the question of the year. The Coastal Commission adopted our social.
And we're starting to lose you, Eric.
What? All right. Better. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ed?
We still can't hear you. I think you're coming back.
Okay, better.
That's better. Okay, you're on.
Okay, so since the Coastal Commission adopted our social justice policy, it really is a lens through which everything going forward, social justice needs to be addressed. And as part of that policy, we're not just looking at, that what at some point was, all right, I'll use Oxnard for an example, is communities that really have been adversely affected by some of the decisions of the state and the Coastal Commission with power plants and, and public projects that seem to end up in the same spot over and over again. It's now a more nuanced policy. The coast belongs to everyone. And that means not just the people that live at the coast, but the people that also live inland. It's in our Constitution. And the Commission wants to make certain that people of all socioeconomic backgrounds has access to the coast. So that means that the Commission, and again, I'm speaking strictly for myself because that's all I can do. And for myself, looking at policies, even in terms of parking and housing projects that and commercial projects going forward, are they going to affect certain segments of the population different than others? So I'll take permit parking for example, permit parking. I would have a very difficult time voting for permit parking in the coastal zone if it meant that people coming to the coast don't have access to our beaches.
There's no question here about the cost of some of the requirements of the Commission. Let's see, where was it here? It was one of the issues that I think it was Pacific said they had to build a $2 million sewer line or something to account for the to accommodate the Commission. Is there some funding for that? Given where we're at in the state, I think it's very difficult to find funding for almost anything. And this is one of the reasons why it's good that we're having these joint meetings, and that the Commission has the opportunity to hear from local elected officials, because only half the Commission of the appointed commissioners are elected officials. And sometimes as a body, we forget that the decisions that we make often have serious economic repercussions. I think we all know that in this room and at the Commission that we are going to need to be moving our public infrastructure off the coast. We're going to need to get our lift stations away from the cliffs. We're going to need to get our wastewater treatment plants off our bays. And that's going to be expensive and painful. But it's not going to get any cheaper. And the quicker we can move that way, the better off we'll all be. Okay, do we have any other questions? I don't see any more in the chat here. I guess perhaps just more of an open question. I appreciate, first of all, the Commission establishing this working group to address the sea level rise. And I realize it's much different than the normal regulatory framework that you use in coming up with policies. But I guess I'm curious what you think about this cooperative effort to try to get through some of these thorny issues. Do you see that perhaps as something we could try to build on in the future?
Well, thank you, Mayor. No, I think that it's fantastic that this group was revitalized and reformed and is working in partnership with the counties and with the Coastal Commission. And I guess if I could give a little bit of friendly advice, is the Coastal Act applies to everyone. And the Coastal Commission should not, and really at the end of the day, cannot be the only body that is enforcing the Coastal Act. It's important that cities and counties also take the Coastal Act into consideration as they're issuing permits, as they're looking into the decisions that they make. I think good practice would be to even, as you're taking applications, as planning commissioners and councils are looking at projects, how does this project comply with the Coastal Act? And it's one of those issues that the commission will be, what is it my dad used to say, and I know this is somewhat condescending to say it, but I'll say it anyway: you mind your business and I won't. And it'll help instill confidence, I think, in our partnership if the commission can see concrete examples of how the cities and counties are complying with the Coastal Act.
Let me ask my fellow leadership team members, would any of my leadership team members have a question? Jill, Ed, or Heidi?
Well,
Eric?
I think there's, what I'm seeing in the comments a little bit is that there's still a lot of interest in short-term rental policies, that the ones in beach cities often are not economical. So, it conflicts, and there's a lot of issues. And the short answer from us, I think, is it's still on our radar. We just really focused on sea level rise this year. But I don't know if Eric wants to say anything about his point of view on short-term rentals.
This seems like a rather dangerous question for me to answer. But again, I will reemphasize, I am only speaking for myself. My personal opinion is that short-term vacation rentals do offer some lower cost accommodations, and some short-term vacation rentals, great. A lot of short-term vacation rentals, not so great. I mean, we've seen what's happened up in Trinidad and how outside investors have come in and they've bought really block after block and undermined neighborhoods. That's obviously terrible, and nobody wants that for their community. It also has a tendency to undermine the housing stock. So a lot of the places that would be potential short-term vacation rentals are also places that would be housing for people of limited means. So as our principles state, is there's not one rule that fits the entire coast, and there shouldn't be. Is we're very diverse, and I guess probably a few thousand short-term vacation rentals doesn't really change Los Angeles. It may not change Long Beach, but you know what? A few thousand short-term vacation rentals in Pismo Beach, and Pismo Beach is not Pismo Beach anymore. I'm a big fan of the not necessarily the homestays, but where where it's your primary residence. I think that they cause fewer problems. It's still a neighborhood. You have accountability to your to your neighbors. So, you know, I don't have any issues with the homestays. I feel a lot more comfortable too when it's somebody's primary residence. And my guess is that I'm probably not too far out of the mainstream on these views.
Going back to the sea level rise comment or topic, there's a question here. Someone attended the Coastal Commission meeting / work session in 2019 regarding sea level rise adaptation guidance. During the meeting, the commission outlined a 2-year commitment to continue working on the guidance doc. How is this effort progressing?
These are complicated issues. I think that there's an awful lot of conversations taking place. I think everyone agrees that, you know, we need to have policies, we need to have plans. It's progressing.
I would use the example of this working group that the cities, counties, and Coastal Commission have worked on together as an example of the conversation continuing. Would you agree?
Yes.
We had another comment from Malibu. I'm not sure this applies to Eric, but about the proliferation of small cell and microcell installations that are interfering with scenic resources. And the question really is anybody else having this problem? And I can say that in Huntington Beach, we had an installation on a light pole that was probably the size of a dorm room refrigerator. That was high up on a pole on PCH next to the glassed-in balcony of the neighbor 3 feet away. So yes, you know, having problems with that interrupting the view. They're like, well, it was on the mountainside, so we didn't interfere with the beach view. And the bigger concern to me was this large thing up in the air, and what if there's an earthquake? So I just wanted to say to Malibu, I can say at least one other city has been looking at this, and you know, of course, all cities are open to the discussion at any time to get advice. How it's been working out. So yes, Malibu, other cities have faced it.
Carmel, I think, also has some issues right now with that.
I'm not seeing any other topics here. Do you want to move on, Chair Waage?
Yeah, I think our time is about up. And again, I want to thank you, Eric, for joining us, for breaking away from your commission meeting. And again, we appreciate your thoughts on this. I guess the key thing is I really appreciate the commission agreeing to work with us on trying to come up with some guidance in this case for sea level rise that I think it's going to really help. We'll end up with better guidance when we're all done here. Thank you very much, Eric.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Waage. Thank you all for inviting me, and I'll see you in December.
Thank
If we
you.
could go back to the presentation slide, next slide. This next item we'll spend a short period of time on accessory dwelling unit policies. And we have Jim Lewis, the city manager of Pismo Beach, along with Jeff Winkleplet, this community development director. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Waage. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. This item is just meant to be a few minutes as kind of a commercial to highlight this issue for you. Many of us have been focused on short-term rentals and other policies, but this is something that's coming at us really quick. On January 1st of 2020 this year, if you don't know, it's good you'll know now, state law changed to pretty much make ADUs ministerial, and that there's not much we can do to regulate them anymore. When we asked for guidance from the Coastal Commission on, in the coastal zone, could these be regulated? The guidance was clear as mud. It was where LCP policies directly conflict with new provisions or require refinement to be consistent with new laws, those LCP should be updated to be consistent with the new ADU provisions to the greatest extent feasible. That's clear except for this last sentence, while still complying with the Coastal Act. What does that mean? And so we thought we'd just take a few minutes to share with you how we're trying to work through this in Pismo Beach. I've asked our community development director to give you a real example and to put this on your radar, and we will continue to encourage the commission for clearer guidance. Mr. Winkleplet.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Good afternoon, everybody. As Jim mentioned, I will briefly touch on a couple of points that the city of Pismo Beach has experienced through the recent update of our ADU ordinance in response to legislation that went into effect January 1. I also wanted to provide a heads up on a couple of items for cities also be going through their updates and are dealing with ADUs currently in the process under the state law or under the new regulations. So since the legislation went into effect, Pismo Beach, we've been waiting for clear guidance from coastal staff and HCD on how to ensure the consistency between the new regulations and the new or Coastal Act and the new regulations. While some information was provided in the memo from the coastal director, parking, which is the key issue for Pismo Beach and likely the key issue for a lot of cities, was not really adequately addressed. We have had multiple conversations with both HCD staff and coastal staff confirming one thing, that any ordinances that do not fully comply with the new state requirements are deemed null and void. So it's not a circumstance where you can pick and choose pieces of your existing ordinance that do comply and put those into practice. So we did confirm ours is no longer void, or no longer, it is null and void. So with that, we have had a couple of things that have come up specifically with new ADUs that are in process under the current ordinance or state law. One of the key things that we learned working with HCD staff, particularly Mr. Greg Nicholas, is that HCD does not have a definition of complete application. That is one of the key things we ran into and indicated that this is the key point for us, that based on HCD, once a city takes in anything related to a new ADU application, it could be the application, it could be fees, it could just be simply submittal of plans. That is the time where ADU or HCD considers that the 60-day time clock starts ticking. So it's not the standard practice that most cities and counties have, where we will take in what we think is a complete application, being fees, plans, and an application, and then we have time to push it back saying what they're missing. They're basically saying it needs to be complete when it comes in. So in that, the big challenge that Pismo Beach had, and one of the discussions we've had with HCD and coastal staff, is the additional CDP that we need to process at an admin level. That will take additional time, obviously. And that 60 days includes also the building permit process, where typically you will have the planning entitlement and then it kicks over to building. The entire thing has to be done within 60 days. So City of Pismo Beach, we put together a checklist, and we're not accepting anything except the full complete package, including the construction documents for any future projects, any future ADU projects that are coming through. So just a heads up, be aware of the timing. We've been so far fairly lucky with that application in particular, as they have been changing the project as we go forward. And we've been indicating that as restarting the 60-day time clocks, continuing to work with that applicant as we speak. We have been processing our new ordinance, as Mr. Lewis indicated. We have gone through Planning Commission, and just earlier this week, the ordinance was adopted by the City Council, and we will be pushing that up to both Coastal Commission and HCD. As part of that, we have received written feedback from HCD. We have not received anything from staff yet, but one of the pushbacks we had from HCD had to do with a portion of our city that, according to our fire folks at CAL FIRE, they have significant concerns with adding any more structures and, more importantly, any more people up in that area, primarily because it's a one-way in, one-way out with very little street parking. That has been a prohibition that has been in our previous ADU ordinance, and that we are pushing forward with the current ordinance. Obviously, California with the fires, that is a key issue, and we're getting support from CAL FIRE, and we will continue to work with the folks at HCD. But that is just something, if you do have some of those areas that are of concern with life safety, continue to push that forward. We will obviously see where we go with this item. And finally, I think one of the, as mentioned earlier, the key issue with the ADU regulations for Pismo Beach is parking. Looking at what the state law at the biggest issue with, one, you can take a new ADU and take out an existing garage. So you actually lose required parking for the existing unit, create another, essentially another unit, not replace that parking, and then you can add the junior ADU. So obviously that is a huge concern, especially in those areas where we know for most of the year, and definitely for our summer months, parking is an absolute necessity, and it is scarce. So knowing what we know about the Coastal Act, and that parking essentially is access, and public access to coastal resources is, in a nutshell, a majority of the Coastal Act, as Mr. Howell indicated. We have folks coming from the valley, coming from all over the state to visit. If there's no parking, they don't visit. That is an opportunity missed. So one of the key things that we're putting into place within our proposed ordinance for new ADUs, this is for properties in the coastal zone that are within a quarter of a mile of a coastal park, the coastal trail, a vertical access point, whether it be stairs or other access points to the beach, or a coastal viewpoint. We're, as part of our code, proposing that anything within that quarter mile is required to provide parking. And we're looking at 1 space per bedroom up to a maximum of 2. So for Pismo Beach, what this looks like really is that area where a quarter mile we see people parking, taking out their coolers, beach chairs, and heading down to the beach. So we wanted to make sure that this new ADU law does not impact that access and that general public parking. And the HCD staff did see this as part of our ordinance, and in the response to us, they have not yet said anything in opposition to our proposal, because we believe it is reasonable and it makes sense, and it does mesh the two items with the new legislation and the Coastal Act. So
yeah, we will have to move on. So I think
that was it. Thank you.
I think the bottom line is we do need to enforce the Coastal Act within the coastal zone, and not just allow everything to happen. We can certainly enforce our coastal policies. If we can go back to the, okay, let's move to the next slide. Next item, we'll have Heidi Messner ask for input on our work plan for 2021. Heidi.
Thank you, Chair Waage. Yeah, this is a really important thing that we want to look forward to in 2021. What does that look like? What do we want to focus on? And I'm sure that many people here have some thoughts and ideas. I know that I will first give a little bit of background on what has been the plan so far and what right now we are looking at. So there are 3 areas we've primarily focused on. And then I think we've talked about them today, but it has been primarily these 3: the developing relationship with the commissioners and staff, educating members on issues pertaining to all the coastal cities, and the networking and communication of what we do. And I hope that this has been helpful for you that are joining us today in hearing the things that we've worked on this year, even in a very challenging 2020. But the 3 primary things outside of these that we've communicated about with the Coastal Commission and with the counties and this group that we are in is of course, sea level rise issues, the LPCs and these ADUs. So those three issues have been the primary issues that we have put our attention to. Primarily sea level rise in 2020, because that was at the top of the pile, so to speak. So if there's anything that outside of those three areas that anyone else feels that might be helpful to look at, to do, please let us know. I know you can put that in the chat, and I believe Jill Hardy is checking those out and making sure that we get information on from our group, from our members of all these coastal cities. We really appreciate you all, and thank you for joining us today. So please just put anything else that you see as really important for this group to be working on in the chat box. That would be helpful for us. You can also, of course, think more about it and email us. Probably Derek and Caroline would be the easiest to email, and they can get that information to us. But yeah, if it sounds like those are the things that we're good to continue working on, then we will stick with that. I don't know if there's anything else. I could highlight a few things, but we really want to focus on our communication with the Coastal Commission and making sure that transitions for cities and counties with, particularly cities in this group, but that we're bridging that well in our responses to sea level rise, and it's not beyond doable, that we're working well with the commissioners. So that's our primary goal here.
Thank you very much, Heidi. And again, if you have questions that you'd like to ask us at this point, we have Jill Hardy is our professional chat checker. She's an expert at this, so I don't see anything here, but put your questions in there. In the meantime, I guess I would, if we don't have any questions yet, go ahead. I see one, Jill, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like housing as a goal for the next year, and it's been brought up a lot. There's a huge conflict between the RENA numbers and coastal access, and how do we balance HCD versus Coastal Commission? And that kind of gets put into every single topic that we talk about. But I don't know if the leadership committee wants to make it as a specific goal to make sure that it gets discussed within each topic.
I feel like, this is a big issue right now for cities, and we are struggling with this issue and how to communicate it well. We can certainly look at how to maybe bridge that subject within the other areas that we're looking at, because it is impacting all of the areas that we just discussed, all three of those other areas, in particular with sea level rise. And that is, of course, the cream of the crop right now at the top that we are really trying to work on. And that is something that we can communicate within our adaptive plan. So I think I'm looking through it right now, kind of a draft of what we were discussing, and I don't see that. And we can, what do you think, Chair Waage? Is there any way that might just be at least a bullet point?
Yes, I think we do need to consider it on almost everything we do now. The legislature, the governor are all pushing housing, of course, and there's going to be a lot of impacts, a lot of issues that we just talked about with ADUs on how you accommodate ADUs and still allow for coastal access. I think there's a natural conflict there, but I think we certainly have to consider that in almost anything we do from moving forward. Any other leadership committee comments on that issue?
The other topic that has come up a couple of times is the conflict between a rail line and sea level rise, and protecting those rail lines and prioritizing those. as the Coastal Commission looks at sea level rise.
Indeed, this is Ed. I think that public infrastructure issue is going to have to be addressed. But getting back to the housing issue, I think we've got the three-headed monster here. We've got ADUs, we've got the RENA and housing mandates, and the RENA numbers have come out since our last meeting. So I think it's only appropriate for us to incorporate that, Chair Waage, into our thinking, housing in general in the coastal zone. And we have our ongoing short-term rental issue. So we've got ADUs, housing mandates, and short-term rentals that all impact coastal cities, possibly disproportionately because of the multiple regulatory framework that we're dealing with HCD and the Coastal Commission. So having a sensible approach to these housing challenges in the coastal zone, I think should be a priority for us next year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Go ahead.
It's being sort of suggested that it's, definitely a topic that goes along with short-term rentals and ADUs. And so maybe that that topic is more broadened with, short-term rentals, ADUs, and RENA numbers, somehow word it so that it the topic incorporates all, because one affects the other.
That's exactly what I was suggesting. I agree with that.
And then there's another topic about bluff edge location and what the Coastal Commission considers the edge of the bluff, roadside versus existing bluff edge. So there was a question about, or a statement about that. In general, these items, then another thought, in general, these items where two different state agencies have conflicting missions should be highlighted and discussed, So again, that goes going back to, HCD versus Coastal Commission, huge conflict in what they're requiring. And then in the sea level rise, including bluff edge location as a subtopic, in addition to rail line protection. Those would be, I'd say, subtopics within sea level rise.
Yeah, I agree. I think we certainly need to work with league staff and trying to, as these as legislative issues come along, we need to certainly advocate for legislation that will not conflict with other things we're trying to do. I mean, we're kind of caught in the middle of a lot of these, and we don't have really good guidance. We definitely need to address housing in some fashion, yes.
Yeah, and I also just see that, with what Commissioner Howell just said about some of the infrastructure issues and how they're viewing that, that we really need to keep this at the forefront of these conflicting agencies that cities are impacted by. It's really important that we continue to push forward on that. So
yes, and there's definitely a comment that just came up about public infrastructure, again, along with rail lines and bluff definitions, definitely under sea level rise, whether we also consider it, can't have short-term rentals and visitor serving if you don't have the infrastructure, but don't have the infrastructure if you don't protect the where they are. So it's all intermingling, and I think as a leadership committee, we appreciate everybody's topics, comments, so that it can help us create subtopics in each of our main ones.
Yes.
It looks like we don't have any more chat items. Jill, is that correct?
I think I got them all, unless somebody else.
Okay, I would just, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to have each of our leadership committee members weigh in. Let's see, Eric Friedman, do you want to have any final thoughts here before we wrap it up? Okay, let me go to Heidi first, then while Eric tries to get online here. Heidi, go ahead. Just any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I just really appreciate how well this this committee has worked with the Coastal Commission and the impacts, at least the continued movement forward. And I think we've definitely done well in attempting to communicate and work on a good, strong, at least stronger, healthy working relationship. And that's been important. I do think that we need to continue to just move forward in that area as well, and address these issues. Unfortunately, I think Jill too, are both going to be done. This concludes our term. And so both of us will be terming out. So we will not be here next year, but I would like to just see that continued movement forward, because our cities are so impacted by all these agencies that are a bit conflicting, like we've discussed. So I appreciate all the work the committee's done, and really am going to miss you guys and appreciate the coastal cities. I'm living in a coastal city still, so I will continue to advocate for you and at every level I can.
I
So,
appreciate
thank
that
you.
very much. Eric, do we have you now?
Yes, for
Go ahead.
some reason I couldn't get unmuted, but first I just want to thank you, Chair Waage, for leading us this year, and my fellow colleagues. And for those who are stepping off this year, it's been a pleasure to get to know you. I'm sorry we didn't get to meet in person more often this year, but just in general, the issue of the housing, the short-term rentals, ADUs, and RENA are very impactful for a lot of us, especially as we're smaller cities. So that's an issue definitely I think we'll be looking at going into next year. And then also just in general, the issue of local coastal plans and data driven and timelines is something that we're looking at too. Instead of just by 2030, you have to do X on sea level rise. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I just really want to thank this group, this leadership group. I've learned a lot from all of you, and hopefully I'll be able to continue on next year as part of this team. So thank you very much.
We'd love to have you continue. I think you've made a lot of great contributions. Harvey, are you available?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I want to reiterate what Heidi was saying. I really think the relationship between the cities and the Coastal Commission is something that we should really work on. It's important for both of us. I think the Coastal Commission's aim of making sure that the coast is preserved and kept for all Californians is consistent with what cities should be doing. Our city, Half Moon Bay, is working on its LCP. We've been talking to Coastal Commission staff almost on a weekly basis. It's really important that we keep that relationship going. So thank you very much. And I think this group is important and will continue to work with the Coastal Commission. So thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. Jill.
Well, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to serve on the leadership committee over the last few years. I really enjoyed it, learned a lot, and feel like maybe, hopefully, I've contributed something. Like Heidi, I'm not leaving my coastal city. In fact, my family came to Huntington Beach almost 100 years ago, so I haven't really been taught to leave. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Chair Waage, for your leadership, and Chair Spriggs from last year for your leadership. You both did a great job in the last couple of years. And then one other thing, Caroline and Derek, can one of you make sure you save the chat, please, because there's still a couple of comments coming in, and one that didn't get addressed but was mentioned a couple of times was sediment. And so we need to find a place to put that in our main topics to keep our eye on. But again, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Ed Spriggs.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I'll be brief because we're just about out of time, but I wanted to say to everybody that your leadership team has been working really hard. We should all, I think, reflect on the fact that we are at the cutting edge of addressing California's future, the coastline's future. And this work that we're doing along with the counties, the coastal counties and the Coastal Commission is very vital to the future of the state. I mean, we can descend into litigation over private property rights and every coastal issue being a battle, every Coastal Commission case being a war, or we can figure out a way to move forward in a more unified way that allows all the coastal cities to have local coastal programs and be protecting the Coastal Act while addressing their local issues. Nothing is really more important for the coastal area of California than the success of this process. So I hope everybody will stay tuned and participate next year. This is going to be very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. I want to thank everyone for joining us at this virtual session. I want to thank our staff, Derek and Carolyn, again, my leadership committee again. And I get the bottom line is we've made some progress, but we have a long ways to go. And I'm afraid it's just going to get more intense and more challenging. But I think if we work hard at this, we can really make a difference. And I think that the new attitude of working with the Coastal Commission will really help us out. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we will be looking for additional comments as you can send them to Derek Dolphy or Carolyn. Their email addresses are on the chat room. Thank you for joining us, and this concludes our first virtual meeting of the Coastal Cities Group. Thank you very much.